The Manilow Method podcast is a production by Logan Allen and me, Barry Harris. Now, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Manilow Method. We're here, we're getting our footing here with our second season. I am Logan Allen, that is my co-host, Barry Harris. Thank you for joining us once again. Today we're talking about a very special album in the Manilow catalog, and it's one of the number one albums in his catalog. Yes, today we are talking about the greatest songs of the 50s, released January 31st, 2006 on Arista Records. It was recorded in a number of different locations. There were 2 studios in Hollywood, 2 in Los Angeles, 1 in North Hollywood, 1 in Burbank, California, and 1 in Las Vegas, Nevada. This album has a lot of special meaning to me because it was released during the Music and Passion residency at the Las Vegas Hilton. That is on this show, famously my favorite era of Barry Manilow. So today is our first episode in the sequence of our show that I really get to explore the love for this era. So Barry, we were actually both around when this album was still kind of making a wave in the public scene. I wasn't alive when it came out, but I was alive shortly after it came out. So Barry, give me some memories you have regarding the release of this album.
Yeah, this was incredibly special for me because it was the first time that Barry Manilow hit number one in my lifetime. In fact, this is actually the most commercially successful Barry Manilow studio album of all time because the other album that went to number one was his live album from 1977. So, this was the first time Manilow hit number one with a studio album, and for fans like me, that was vindication. I started my musical journey earlier in the decade, and one of the things that I encountered time and time again was people telling me nobody listens to this kind of music anymore. And when this went to number one, I was so excited to go back around to those people and say, ha!
In your face.
But actually, what's even more in your face, Logan, was the fact the album came out the week of the Grammys. Usually, somebody who wins an award will usually get a bump and will get to number one. None of the performers at the Grammys got that bump. Barry Manilow beat all of them out. In fact, this sent shockwaves throughout the music industry, so much so that ABC News' Nightline did a story about this. They did a segment back in the day called Sign of the Times, and they devoted one of those stories to Manilow's sudden resurgence and his Las Vegas residency. So it was a really great feeling if you were a Barry Manilow fan at that particular time. So, of course, I remember what it was like to listen to this for the very first time, to open up this shrink wrap and have that exciting adventure. Because I will say, of all the thrills I've ever experienced in my lifetime, there is no experience more thrilling than listening to a Barry Manilow song unfold for the first time ever. And the very first single that was released in advance of the album was Unchained Melody. So I got to hear it on an internet radio station, and I'll talk more about it when we talk about Unchained Melody. But the idea of opening up the shrink wrap and putting this CD into the player was an exciting experience to take this all in for the first time. So, like we mentioned, it came out in 2006, which is, believe it or not, we just passed the 20th anniversary of that, which is amazing. That makes me feel kind of old. But let me show you some of the formats that it's come out on. Obviously, compact disc. They played old compact disc. Then it came out in a dual disc format. And for those of you who don't know what a dual disc is, it's something they tried to do back about 20 years ago, where on one side you have a CD, and then on the other side you have a DVD. And on the DVD, there is a making of the greatest songs of the 1950s, and there are or I should say, what they have is the entire album in PCM enhanced stereo, so slightly better sound quality than you would get on a regular compact disc. And then there was also international versions. We'll go into detail later about what's different about them, but this was the United Kingdom release. Nothing looks different except a few songs are different, and we'll go into that later, like I said. And this is the Japanese version. And here's something that it might shock a few people in the audience. Look what I have.
Wow.
It is a compact cassette. Now, the reason why this is so unfamiliar to people is because this was actually released only in Indonesia. This was not released in North America. I happened, in the part of researching this particular episode, I identified that a cassette was made internationally, and so I went and I was able to track it down. And furthermore, I have a couple other little goodies. This is an album sampler. It's not for me to say, all I have to do is dream, Are You Lonesome Tonight, in snippets about 30 seconds to 90 seconds long, and then it has Unchained Melody, which was the advanced single that had come out. And last but not least, I have another cool little thing here. Love Is a Many Splendored Thing single release. So it looks like Unchained Melody as well as Love Is a Many Splendored Thing were pushed as singles. Barry Manilow did the talk show circuit, so it was great to set our VCRs and watch him on all the talk shows of the day. That was very exciting. And like I said, it was vindication for anybody who ever told me that nobody listens to this kind of music anymore. And the other thing to also highlight, we mentioned this came out on Arista Records, is that this was a comeback for Arista Records. Barry Manilow had left the Arista label, and after he left the Arista label, he went to Concord Records, where he released Here at the Mayflower, Scores, and Two Nights Live, and then he came back to Arista Records, where Clive Davis had been reinstated. So maybe it's a story for another day, but Clive Davis was actually unceremoniously fired from Arista Records and was put out in the cold, and he went to go start his own label, J Records, which became part of Sony BMG. And through a bunch of mergers and acquisitions, Clive Davis was put back in charge of Arista Records. And one of the first things that Clive Davis did when he got back to Arista Records was to bring Barry Manilow back to Arista.
One other interesting thing that they made around this time, very rare for the time period, this is a songbook. This is a songbook for piano, vocal, and guitar for the greatest songs of the 50s record. They hadn't made one of these in years leading up to this album's release, but then all of a sudden this thing just pops out of nowhere, and they haven't made any sense. And for musicians like Barry and I, especially as we go to cover the songs that we really love from these albums, these books are just, because I mean, it is in depth about every song on these albums. Barry, I'm assuming that you love these as much as I do.
Absolutely. You know, I was starving for music books because after 1990s, because it's Christmas album, they stopped making music books, songbooks for Barry Manilow Records. Now, they did try to catch up a little bit in 2000 by releasing the Barry Manilow Anthology, and they picked a couple of original songs from Singing with the Big Bands and the box set that had not been previously transcribed. So that made up for it, but I was bitterly disappointed in 2001 when Here to Mayflower came out, his all-original album, and they did not have a songbook. And so inexplicably, maybe because of its #1 hit status, they published a music book to the greatest songs of the 50s. And I was so overjoyed to get it because it transcribed Barry Manilow's arrangements, so I was able to dig in and appreciate the nuances of it. But of course, to my disappointment, ever since Greatest Songs of the 50s songbook came out, no other Barry Manilow albums have been published in songbook form. Hopefully that will change one day. I know we were talking about this off air, but there are a lot of musicians that contributed to this album.
Yeah, this is the first time my Personell notes has spread on to multiple pages. So if you're going to bear with me here for a little bit, I'm going to try to knock through these and just go rapid fire so this thing isn't 2 hours long. Okay, here we go. The greatest songs of the 50s from 2006. Barry Manilow does vocals, acoustic piano. He did all of the song layouts, and he did an arrangement on track 3. And now here are 3 names in a row that Manilow fans should know from the live universe, all three acoustic piano players, Joey Malati, Ron Pedley, and Steve Welch. Those are three names that were very prominently featured in the 2000s, and Ron and Joey are still featured in the live shows to this day. And now we have reached the first name that I'm going to have Barry correct me on if I mess this up. It's Walter Afanasieff, something like that. How do we do that?
I believe it's pronounced Walter Afanasieff, but he is more commonly known as Walter A. Everybody in the music industry just simply calls him Walter A.
Okay, so Walter A, that's a lot easier, plays keyboards on track 3, and he also did the arrangement and rhythm programming on track 3. Emmanuel Kyriakou did programming on track 3, and then Mike Schroffel did additional programming on track 3. A lot of these specific credits that we have for this record are for track 3 specifically. All the others are just kind of blanket credits. We have 3 guitar players on here: Ken Berry, Mike Lent, and Michael Landau. Michael Landau did guitars on track 3, and Mike Lent, as some of you may know, has been the constant lead guitar player in Manilow's band for over 20 years now. Dave Carpenter and Dave Stone both played the bass. He apparently liked bass players named Dave for this album. On drums was Russ McKinnon and John Robinson. Dan Greco did percussion. Tommy Morgan did the harmonica. I believe we've mentioned him on this show before. Very prominent studio harmonica player. Randy Crenshaw did background vocals and was the vocal contractor. John Joyce and Gary Stockdale also did background vocals. Connie Nasios was the Heavenly Choir on track 4. Phyllis McGuire did a vocal feature on track 8. And Ken and Mitzi Welch did the vocal arrangement for track 8. Okay, so that's kind of the rhythm section, the main band. Now we get to the orchestra, which is the reason why this has gone on to multiple pages, is because they, in fact, list every single person that played in the orchestra. And, you know, we love honoring the studio musicians that play on Barry Manilow albums, so we'd be remiss if we didn't try to list them all. Here we go, everybody. Lock in. Let's do it. Here we go. Kevin Bassenson arranged and conducted on tracks 1, 6, and 10. Doug Walter arranged and conducted on tracks 2, 8, and 9. William Ross arranged and conducted on track 3. Ken Berry arranged and conducted on tracks 4 and 11. Artie Butler arranged and conducted on track 5. Jonathan Barrick Griffiths was the horn conductor on track 6. Larry Blank arranged and conducted on track 7. Flip the page over. Here we go. Ray Ellis arranged and conducted on track 12, and then Jorge Calandrelli, something like that, arranged and conducted on track 13. Joe Soldo was the contractor, and Asa Drury was the concert master. And now we get into specific instruments. Here we go. Saxophones and woodwinds were played by Gene Cipriano, something like that, Gary Foster, Dan Higgins, Greg Huckins, George Shelby, who was the live woodwind player in the Music and Passion shows when they first opened, and Don Shelton. Those are the saxophones and woodwinds. The bassoon was played by Joan. I wanted to say Joni Mitchell. His name is John Mitchell. The flute was played by Dave Shostak and Sheridan Stokes. The oboe was played by Earl Dumler and Joe Stone. The trombone was played by, number 1, the late great Steve Baxter. Rest in peace. Steve Baxter was Barry Manilow's trombone player for 20 years and recently passed away. Rest in peace, Steve. Bryant Byers, Craig Gosnell, Charles Loper, and Chancey Welsh all played the trombone. Trumpet was played by Wayne Bergeron, Charles Davis, Chris Gray, who was the live trumpet at the time in Music and Passion, Warren Leuning, Larry Lunetta, and Larry McGuire. That was the trumpet. On the French horn was Mark Adams, Jim Atkinson, Steve Beckner, Paul Clintworth, Danielle Ondarza, and Brad Warnar. That was the French horn. On the cello was Larry Corbett, Vanessa Freebairn Smith, Stephanie Fife, Rowena Hamill, Paula Hochhalter, John Cravoza, Christina Soul, and David Speltz. On the harp was Marcia Dickstein and Gail Levant. We're on to the second page. Here we go. On the viola was Caroline Buckman, Ken Burward Hoy, my handwriting went away as I kept writing this, Miguel Ferguson, Sam Formicola, Kerry Holzman, Rodney Hertz, Kazi Patelka, Harry Sherinian, and Ray Tischer. Now, one more instrument. We have a bunch of violin players on this record. We have Brian Benning, Charlie Bisharat, Rebecca Bonnell, Ron Clark, Kevin Connolly, Mario DeLeon, Yvette Devereaux, Asa Drury, Ronald Folsom, Armin Garabedian, Neil Hammond, Johanna Trechty, Leanne Mautner, Cynthia Musas, Jennifer Munday, Alyssa Park, Barbara Porter, Teresa Stanislav, David Stensky, Jan To, Olivia Soy, Arena Valashina, Jennifer Walton, Dynell Weber, Margaret Wooten, and Sherry Zippert. That is every single person that played on the greatest songs of the 50s by Barry Manilow. That certainly takes the cake for the longest Personell list that we've ever had. I'm going to set that over there. That was insane. Hey everybody, modern day Logan here. We filmed this episode a long time ago, and in our review of it, we found out we missed some things. Let me give you those things really fast. This album was produced by Barry Manilow, Clive Davis, and David Benson. The entire album was produced by those people, but there were some songs that weren't. Unchained Melody was produced by Walter A., and It's Not For Me To Say was produced by Barry Manilow and Eddie Arkin. Now that you know all the credits, let's get back to the episode. Okay, I think we're going to move on here. We're going to actually get into the actual songs on this album. We're going to start here with track 1. I really do believe that this was a great song to open this album. This is track 1, Moments to Remember, written by Robert Allen and Al Stillman, and it was famously done by the Four Lads. It was written for Perry Como, but he turned it down originally. Like I said, this is a fantastic opening track. Barry, what are your thoughts on Manilow's arrangement of this one?
You know, interestingly, I did not know that Perry Como had turned this song down. That's a very interesting fact. So I listened to this particular song, the original Four Lads version, and the one thing I noticed is that Manilow stays fairly close to the original arrangement, except that Manilow adds a modulation. And just as a quick side note to all of our listeners and our viewers, if you go to our YouTube channel at The Manilow Method, we are going to publicly release a playlist of all of the original versions. So if you know the Manilow CD very well, you might get a real kick out of listening to the original versions in sequence, because for me, this helped me really make clear what did Manilow add to these songs. And I will say, for a lot of these, Manilow did not stray too far from the DNA and the original arrangements, except in this case, he added a key change. So in terms of what else is notable, not too much more, just the key change.
All right, and track 2, this is It's All in the Game. This was written by Charles G. Dawes and Carl Sigmund. I learned some very interesting information about this song, Barry. I want to share it here really quick. Charles G. Dawes, the instrumental writer of this song, originally wrote this and titled it Melody in A Major. This man, Charles G. Dawes, went on to be the Vice President of the United States under President Calvin Coolidge. This is the only #1 song in history to have been written by a U.S. Vice President. Barry, what are your thoughts on this song?
You know, I have to say, that is a fact that I did not know. Outside of music, I am an American history buff, and I am shocked that I did not know that fact.
In your face. There we go. Just blew your mind. So
yes.
What are your thoughts on Manilow's version of this?
Yes, so he is very similar to the original version, except that he adds a key change.
Of course. Of course. I mean, at this point, the key change is Manilow's DNA. We're talking about the DNA of these songs. Manilow is injecting his own musical DNA into these songs. I noticed one weird thing, and I want people to listen to this song and tell me if I'm going crazy or if my headphones are going out or something. But at 2 minutes 39 seconds, I heard like a weird crackly, crinkly noise as the vocal take is trailing off. It's almost like somebody like either readjusted where they were sitting or a lyric sheet was moved or something. I just wanted to point that out. Now we get on to what I consider to be the greatest song on this album. This is track 3, Unchained Melody, written by Alex North and Hi Zaret. This was very famously done by the Righteous Brothers. I would say that is probably the first really well-known version of this song. I personally think across all 50 years of Barry Manilow's career, this is one of the best covers of every album he's done covers on his own albums, and then there's concept albums. We've talked about The Summer of 78 from 1997. You can go back, check that out. But I certainly think that this is one of the best covers that he has ever put out. The vocal performance is out of this world. I mean, at 2 minutes 33 seconds, this is Manilow in the mid-2000s holding a high F sharp with ease. This is just fantastic, and he also nailed this live too. This was featured on the Music and Passion PBS special, and we've seen footage from this over the years on Manilow TV, the Manilow subscription service where you can watch a bunch of his concerts. And I have to say, one of the most impressive things about his performance specifically on this song is the end. He holds a high G in falsetto for 22 seconds. 22 seconds, from 3 minutes 16 seconds to 3 minutes 38 seconds, he is holding a high G, which is just insanity to me. Barry, what do you think of this modern Manilow masterpiece?
Well, like I mentioned earlier in this episode, I actually heard this before the CD came out, and I had the experience of listening to this song unfold because it just builds and builds and builds. And of course, it keeps changing key until it finally hits that beautiful last note. I remember being so knocked out, I was jumping up and down after listening to it, saying, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. That being said, though, this really made me feel a little confused when I heard the rest of the CD, because I was expecting Barry Manilow to do a contemporary take on all these songs, but that's not the case with the rest of the record. So this song is very uncharacteristic of all the other songs, and I would say the main reason for that is that he brought an outside producer in. That was Walter A. Now, for those of you who don't know who Walter A is, I can guarantee you that you absolutely know the music that he has written and produced. He was most famous for being a co-writer and co-producer for Mariah Carey in the 1990s. So he has co-writing credits on All I Want for Christmas Is You and Heroes. You know, you can imagine. So Walter A. was the cutting edge of contemporary producers. And I think Manilow and Walter A. worked very well together. So well, in fact, that Walter A. came back to do additional songs on future albums. But before this, Barry Manilow and Walter A. worked together on the Barbra Streisand duet, I Won't Be the One to Let Go. That was a song that Barry Manilow had written with Richard Marx. So you can see, this is quite interesting. Barry Manilow was hanging with a very hip crowd of music makers, and so he was able to leverage that on this particular song. So Unchained Melody, I mean, Barry Manilow really put his stamp on this, and every time he would do the talk shows and would promote it, we would hear either Love Is a Many Splendored Thing or Unchained Melody. This song, again, it knocked me out the first time that I ever heard it. So one interesting fact to mention about Unchained Melody is that the Righteous Brothers, who had the most famous version of this song, actually covered it. It was originally written for a movie of the same name. It's a song from a movie about prison, so hence Unchained Melody. That's why it's a title of a song that you actually never hear in the lyrics of the song. So yes, so those are my thoughts on Unchained Melody. Just what an amazing performance, one of the highlights of Barry Manilow in the 2000s.
I agree. I think all of the Decades albums that he did, for those of you who don't know, he did the greatest songs of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. All of those albums are fantastic. Great sound, great production, but each of those albums has one or two standout tracks that the vocal performance just takes it to a whole new level. And when we talked about those other albums in the future, we will be sure to mention what those songs are for us personally. Now, we get on to track 4. It's well known that Unchained Melody was a live staple in late 2005 into 2006, but here's another live staple from that same time period. This is Venus, written by Ed Marshall, made famous by Frankie Avalon. Something very interesting that, for those of you who have Manilow TV, you probably know about this. Right before the 50s album came out, Manilow was doing a segment in his Las Vegas shows where he would start with Bandstand Boogie, the American Bandstand theme, and then he would go into a section of songs from this album, and this was always the first song from the album that he would do at the time. And on January 18th, 2006, they were doing Venus in all of their 50s costumes, just like they did it every night, when all of a sudden a shadow came running up the aisle, and nobody knew what was happening, and security almost sprung into action. And it was Frankie Avalon himself. Manilow and the singers recognized him. Manilow pulled him on stage, and Manilow yelled, "It's in your key!" And Frankie took over. And one of the most genius things about that whole thing was Manilow adds a modulation into this that Frankie Avalon was not ready for in this spur-of-the-moment performance, and the band heard that he didn't change keys when they did, so on the spot the band brought it back down to the original key. That is a testament to how insanely talented Manilow's musicians are. Like, that is just an insane skill to have. So Barry, what do you think of this? This is one of my favorite songs on the record. What about you?
Yes, so Venus by Frankie Avalon, I was listening to the original, and surprisingly, Barry Manilow does not take any liberties with the arrangement. He sings it just like Frankie Avalon, except, like you mentioned, Logan, the only difference was that he changed the key. So, I've said this before, Manilow knows when to really get to the heart of the song and reimagine it, and when to leave it alone. And I think he made the right choice by listening to this song and make the decision that there was really nothing else that he could do to it with an arrangement. So I like that he was faithful. But one of the things that I have pointed out on an earlier episode when we were talking about Jingle Bells, the Bing Crosby and Andrews Sisters version, one of the advantages that Barry Manilow has is that when he takes a song and pretty much faithfully recreates the arrangement, one of the things that is his biggest advantage is that he can record it in superior sonic quality, so that way you could appreciate all the nuances of the record. But I really liked Barry Manilow's take on Venus.
All right, and here we get to another song that turned into a live staple as you got into 2006. This is track 5, It's Not For Me To Say, written by Robert Allen and Al Stillman, which you will notice is the same songwriting duo that wrote track 1, Moments to Remember. Very interesting. Track 5, this is It's Not For Me To Say, written by Robert Allen and Al Stillman for Johnny Mathis. Johnny Mathis is a classic golden voice of the 50s, and honestly, I don't think you could make a 50s tribute album without doing something that Johnny Mathis touched. He was absolutely huge in the 50s. This song was actually used in the Music and Passion show as one of the first incarnations of the audience member dance segment, where in the middle of the song, Manilow would go over to one of the sides of the stage and pull a lady from the audience to slow dance with him in the middle of the song. And something interesting, we have never seen any footage of this. We know for sure it happened. We have countless accounts of it happening. We've never seen footage of it. So, an interesting idea that I had is we've seen footage of him doing the song Blue Velvet live, and the ending is totally different from what is on the greatest songs of the 60s. I would be interested, since this song ends so soft and it's such a delicate landing at the end, did he change the end of it live? That's another question that I would have if we ever saw live footage of this one. And I honestly thought that this song, at least the vibe of it, it was so romantic, it could have fit in the Paris show, honestly. If he was looking for an easy way to shake some things up, this could have worked there. I absolutely love the vibe of this one. And this is the first song on this 50s record where there's not a modulation. Barry, what did Manilow do differently with this song?
Interestingly, the only thing that he did differently compared to Johnny Mathis was that he changed the key to be in his range, because for all of you who know Johnny Mathis's voice, he's got an incredibly high voice, and it's so different from Barry Manilow's voice. But the one thing I want to point out when it comes to It's Not For Me To Say, now for those of you who listen and watch everything that we've put out, you all know exactly what I'm about to say. And that is, this particular recording did not come from the greatest songs of the 50s sessions. This is actually the first time that one of the songs that Barry Manilow recorded in 1995 came out. So in 1995, Barry Manilow went into the studio with Eddie Arkin co-producing, and he recorded a CD's or more worth of songs and never released them. This particular song, It's Not For Me To Say, marks the first time that one of those songs was actually put out publicly. And the reason we know this definitely came from that era is, one, because Eddie Arkin has a co-production credit on this song and not the others. Also, we listened to some audio clips that Barry Manilow released to his 1-900 number. He had a 900 hotline that you could call for a fee, and you could hear a personal message that Barry Manilow updated so he could share some thoughts with his fans and give them some inside information. And on one of those messages, he mentioned back in 1996 that he had recorded It's Not For Me To Say. So that's a double confirmation that this comes from the 1995 sessions. And like you said, Logan, this is very romantic. The orchestration's beautiful. And of course it would be, because it's an Artie Butler arrangement. We love Artie Butler. He's definitely one of our favorite arrangers. I think that Barry Manilow and Artie Butler worked together so well, and I think this was the perfect choice of any song to pick from those 1995 sessions to put on this record. This one was a fantastic choice.
Here we go, track 6, the other song that they were really pushing to get popular from this album. Track 6 is Love Is a Many Splendored Thing, written by Sammy Fain and Paul Francis Webster. This was the other live staple of the time, 2005 leading into 2006, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, Barry. We're going to put the tinfoil hat on for a second, and I am going to speculate that potentially this was the first song from the greatest songs of the 50s to be performed live. We have record of this song being performed as far back as October 29th, 2005. And what makes that interesting to me is the 50s album had not yet been announced. He hadn't even talked publicly that he was doing a 50s record. So I would be very interested to see, how did he introduce that song in the show? I've got record of Bandstand Boogie happening before it, so obviously he was tying into the whole 50s vibe, but did he tell people at the Hilton, hey, we're doing a 50s record, don't tell anybody, we haven't announced it yet? Like, that would be very interesting to know. How did he integrate this and make it make sense in the show without telling people that an album was coming? That's something else I'd love to see on Manilow TV, if somebody can swing that. I have to say, this song is a continuation of just how awesome and how strong his vocal performances were in the 2000s. I mean, you're all up in almost getting up to the tenor range of up in here. You're all up in here for a lot of the song, and he actually holds this D natural for 12 seconds at the end, which is not an easy note to hold on a closed vowel like ooh and e. He holds it on the word thing for 12 seconds. That is a marvelous note for him to be hitting, because at this point, I mean, he was in his 60s, so he's as he's aging, his voice is certainly not getting weaker, it's getting stronger, and I think this song is a fantastic example of that. Barry, what do you think of his arrangement on this?
Yeah, so surprisingly, this is another arrangement that is very faithful to the original. The only big change that Manilow made to the arrangement is that he lowered it by a half step, but the original version actually has the modulation. So Manilow kept this song intact. It was originally recorded by the Four Aces. Now, one thing that I know, because I hear from people who watch and listen to our program, I know that there is a sizable portion of our audience that is from my hometown here in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. So I have to make mention of an interesting fact about this song. the lead singer of the Four Aces was Al Alberts, and many people who grew up in the Delaware Valley know who Al Alberts is. So after being in the Four Aces, Al Alberts and his wife settled down here in the Delaware Valley, and then he joined our local ABC affiliate, WPVI Channel 6, where he hosted a weekly musical variety program where he featured young children and gave them their first shot at talent. So many people in the Delaware Valley grew up watching the Al Albert Showcase. That's just a little bit of a side note, but I wanted to give that nugget of information for those viewers and listeners from the Delaware Valley in Pennsylvania who would absolutely know who Al Alberts is. And so Love Is a Many Splendid Thing was one of their greatest hits.
Here we go. This is track 7. This is Rags to Riches, written by Richard Adler and Jerry Ross. Once again, we've got some high note action right here at 258. He holds a high F sharp. I thought this is one of the songs on the album that has the most vibe of a big band. Like, it's got the trumpet, it's got the swing, it's everything you could want out of a classic big band sound from the 50s. What are your thoughts on this one, Barry?
Yeah, so what I mentioned, I took some notes on this, and of course, Tony Bennett, one of the greatest vocalists of all time.
Yes.
I wrote that Manilow sticks to a consistent swing feel, whereas the feel changes throughout the Tony Bennett version. And of course, Barry Manilow adds a modulation. So
Shocker.
This really adds some Manilow-isms into this particular song.
Next up, we have a duet. The only duet featured on this album is Sincerely mashed up with Teach Me Tonight. Sincerely was written by Harvey Fuqua and Alan Freed, and Teach Me Tonight was written by Gene DePaul and Sammy Kahn. This is a duet with Phyllis McGuire. Now, something very interesting is just recently in the Manilow TV history, we have seen supposedly the only time that this medley was ever performed. It was August 5th, 2006 at the Las Vegas Hilton. And the difference was he didn't duet with Phyllis McGuire. He duetted with somebody else who we're going to keep a secret until later in the episode when we talk about a different version of this song. But just know this song was supposedly only played once, August 5th, 2006 at the Hilton. Any thoughts on this one, Barry?
Yeah, so again, comparing to the original version, Manilow kept the orchestration and the feeling pretty much the same. The only thing that is different is that Manilow does it in a different key that suits him, and he adds some of the vocal responses because the Andrews Sisters was like a closed jazz harmony that I think this is in the vein of the kind of music that Manilow really loved when he was growing up. So I bet this was an incredible thrill for him to sing this live that one time and include this on this album.
Right. Yeah, one time. And it's crazy that we have now seen that one time. Track 9 is Are You Lonesome Tonight? Very famously and very well known by Elvis Presley, one of the most famous singers of all time. It was written by Lou Handman and Roy Turk. This was a live staple in early 2006 for Barry Manilow. He had a scene where he would go over to a lounge and sing a ballad towards the end of the shows. And normally that song would be something like Somewhere Down the Road that we talked about previously here in this second season on our If I Should Love Again discussion, but he replaced that with Are You Lonesome Tonight for a long time at the beginning of 2006. So this is something that he obviously seemed very proud of, and I really do think that he was able to crawl into the lyric on this one. And something important to mention is there is no key change on this one. So Manilow didn't do a whole lot of Manilow on this one. And personally, I might get flacked for this, but being me, I kind of prefer Manilow's version over Elvis's version. There's just a little more of a I don't know exactly how to describe it. It's one of those things that's indescribable for me, I guess, but there's just a certain air about it. And the one thing I want to mention is he does a little lyric switch up after the instrumental. Earlier in the song, he talks about the chairs in the parlor and looking at the doorstep, and then the instrumental happens and he comes back into that section and he says the chairs in our parlor and look at our doorstep. So that's another example of Manilow kind of twisting the lyrics a little bit, still keeping the essence of the song, but really focusing on what he's trying to express through the song. Barry, what do you think of this beauty?
Yeah, I think you're right, Logan. I think he's really locked into something that he's trying to say and express through the song. The only note that I really have is that Elvis's version seems to have some dialogue, and of course, Manilow did not do the dialogue. So this is a great example of Manilow taking a song and making it entirely his own, and I think he did that very well on this song.
So now we get into later in the record where we're not sure if any of these songs were ever played live. So if you want to find our email address down in the description, themanilowmethod@gmail.com, reach out and let us know if you ever saw him at the Hilton and if you ever did any of these songs. Track 10 is Young at Heart. Frank Sinatra was famous for doing this one. It was written by Johnny Richards and Carolyn Lee. There's 2 modulations in this one, so he added even more Manilow into this one. Barry, what do you think of this track?
Yeah, so I think that I listened to the Frank Sinatra version for comparison, and he's in the same tempo, same feeling as Frank Sinatra, but Manilow, he puts his own flourishes on the orchestration, but he keeps the counter lines that you hear in the orchestra, and one of the things is that Manilow puts this modulation where it pushes him into Frank Sinatra's original key. So it's almost like he is paying homage to Frank Sinatra by ending it where Frank began it. I don't know if that was his intention, but I think that's a nice way to complete the circle, because we know how much Barry Manilow loves the music of Frank Sinatra.
Exactly. Track 11 is All I Have to Do Is Dream. Now here's a name that I'm going to butcher, and I'm terribly sorry. It was written by Felice and Baudlou Bryant. Do you know how to say that, Barry, or are we just going to try to move past that?
We just might have to just keep going on because I don't know. I don't know.
Anyway, you can look it up and try to see how it's actually pronounced. Something interesting is I know of one time that Manilow played this live, and it has nothing to do with the greatest songs of the 50s album. Back in the late 70s, he did some TV specials, and on one of them, he had John Denver as his guest star. He had guest stars on all of them. Ray Charles did a duet with him on It's a Miracle on the second special, I do believe. But on the third Barry Manilow special, John Denver was the special guest, and they did a medley of Everly Brothers songs, and one of those songs was All I Have to Do Is Dream. So I don't know if this song made it into the show when it was actually formally released on the 50s record here, but he certainly did part of it live with the late John Denver back in the late 70s. Barry, we've got a modulation again in this one. Shocker, shocker. What do you think of this one?
Yeah, I actually think this is one of my favorite songs that made the final cut of the record that came from the 2005 sessions that produced most of the songs on this album. He seems to really slow the tempo down, and he takes it down a half step from the Everly Brothers version, and he adds that modulation, like you mentioned, he modulates up A minor third, so that's more than just a couple of notes, so it really pushes it much higher. But the one thing that Manilow kept intact was the vocal harmony, which he appears to have recorded with his own voice, and I really like the blend that Manilow can do with his own voice. Not every artist can do that well, but Manilow does it in such a fantastic way.
So here we go, track 12. This is What a Diff'rence a Day Made. Originally written by Maria Grever. She wrote it in Spanish originally, and then a man named Stanley Adams put it into English. I want to make an interesting notice here. This is another song that does not feature a modulation, one of the few on this album that does not feature a modulation, and it's in F major, just like It's Not For Me To Say, and It's Not For Me To Say didn't have a modulation either, so he must like the key of F major so much that he doesn't want to leave it. This is interesting, because normally, as we get towards the end of Manilow albums, that's when I start to think, okay, he's starting to wrap this up. What is he trying to convey here? And before we get to the last track, which I think is the perfect end to this album, I think that this song really fits at the end of this sort of concept album. What do you think of this, Barry?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at all of these songs together trying to tell a singular story, then I do think that this song fits very well. One of the things I noted compared to the original Dinah Washington version is that he changes from a triplet to a swing feel. So he took some liberties in the way this song is presented, but he does match the original in not adding any modulations to it. So it's another beautiful track.
So here we get to the last one on the album, and boy, do we have a couple of things to talk about with this one. Number one is, up until recently, I had never heard of him playing this one live. However, we found someone post a show review from May 19th, 2006 at the Las Vegas Hilton, and they claim that he did this song. This is track 13, Beyond the Sea, written by Charles Tennant and made famous by Bobby Darin. I had no idea that this song was ever done live, but one thing that I want to say to the powers that be, Manilow TV, there is a reference made at the end of this song that if he actually did this live, I would love to know if he actually made this reference in the live version. At the end, he references some bar by the harbor from Here at the Mayflower. When I tell you I about shot through the ceiling when I first listened to this song and I heard that reference. So if he actually did this live, we need to see it, because I would love to know if he actually made a live reference to Some Bar by the Harbor, a song that, up to this point, I mean, he hasn't even talked about in the media, to my knowledge. I don't know about you, Barry, but I have not heard him mention this song anywhere in person. Just on record, we've heard references of it. So, Barry, what do you think of Beyond the Sea? Let's stop geeking out about the Mayflower. Let's actually talk about this album. What do you think of the last track on the 50s record?
Yes, and so to pick up on the reference to Here at the Mayflower, that's an album that came out in 2001. This is an all-original album, and it broke a long freeze of Manilow putting out original albums. In fact, Paradise Cafe in 1984 was an all-original jazz album, and we had to wait all the way until 2001 until we could hear another all-original album. And like I mentioned earlier in the beginning of this episode, Here at the Mayflower came out on Concord Records, one of the rare Barry Manilow albums to not come out on Arista Records. So the throwback to Here at the Mayflower was a nice bone that Manilow threw to the fans like us who really love that particular record. I really like how Manilow slows down Beyond the Sea, beyond the Bobby Darin version that we all know so well. And I really, really like the fact that this particular track seems to have more of a contemporary edge as compared to the other 1950s songs. So this is a really refreshing arrangement, and it's, like you said, Logan, this is the perfect song to close out the record.
Okay, so that is the 13 tracks regularly released on the greatest songs of the 50s. However, we do have a handful of tracks to talk about, some bonus tracks that were added, some miscellaneous tracks that have to do with this era. The first one here, Barry, what song are we starting with?
Yes, so the United Kingdom version had a song called If You Love Me, Really Love Me. This was a song that was originally recorded by Edith Piaf in French, and then it was translated into English, and it was made famous by Brenda Lee. And I listened to both of the versions, and they are both breathtaking. But interestingly, Manilow really adds his element into this particular song, and he gives it a really exciting pop feeling with a big key change at the end with a great background vocal arrangement. Interestingly, if you watch the Making of the Greatest Songs of the 50s video that's on the dual disc version, you will actually see the background vocal session for this particular song. So I will say that this appeared to be a strong contender for the final track list. It did not make the final cut, but it was eventually released for the United Kingdom. And I do want to go on record and say, of all the songs that were produced in 2005, with the exception of Unchained Melody, which was produced by Walter A., this song, If You Love Me, Really Love Me, is my favorite song that was recorded during those sessions.
The next track that we want to mention here is another speculatory mention from the 95 sessions. Barry, what are we talking about?
Yes, this is As Time Goes By. If you watched our bonus episode on the Close Up DVD, which was released after his Summer of 78 album in 1996, and the Clicker Tour was the tour that he went on to promote that album, he sang As Time Goes By fairly frequently during that tour, and it is preserved on the close-up DVD. So this song was very well known to us Barry Manilow fans, and I really loved hearing the version of As Time Goes By as recorded in the studio. And Manilow is pretty much in the same key as Tony Bennett, but Manilow's tempo is much slower, and Manilow's ending is a whole lot quieter. And interestingly, I should also say, Frank Sinatra recorded As Time Goes By as well, but I did not hear too many similarities between the Frank Sinatra version and the Barry Manilow version. I think that Barry Manilow was trying to model more on the Tony Bennett version here. But yes, we strongly believe this came from the 1995 sessions.
And one more thing we want to briefly mention here is a little bit of an interesting story. It's a song called Have I Told You Lately? But Barry, what makes this so interesting to us right now?
So this is quite funny. Have I Told You Lately? Many of you know this because Rod Stewart had a hit record with it. It was actually originally recorded by Van Morrison, written by Van Morrison, released in 1989, and then Rod Stewart had a hit with it after he covered it and famously performed it on MTV Unplugged. Barry Manilow apparently recorded Have I Told You Lately in the 1995 sessions that were not released. But here's the thing that is very weird, Logan. When the Greatest Songs of the 50s was about to come out, I believe the retailer was Walmart, offered a special exclusive that if you purchased the Greatest Songs of the 50s through them, they would give you an immediate digital download of Have I Told You Lately. So after hearing Unchained Melody, I heard Have I Told You Lately. And I love his version of Have I Told You Lately. I've actually adapted his version and put it into my restaurant show. Whenever I play restaurants, 9 times out of 10, I will do the Barry Manilow version of Have I Told You Lately. But the reason why it's here on the Greatest Songs of the 50s, I think, is a result of some confusion, because there is a song in the Great American Songbook that is called Have I Told You Lately That I Love You, but it is not related to the Van Morrison Rod Stewart song. So I think there may have been some confusion on the record company's part, and somebody mistakenly believed this was a 1950s song, only to be told this is a 1980s song. So hence, Barry Manilow did eventually re-record this song and put it on Greatest Songs of the 80s. So we'll talk about it more when we do an episode on the Greatest Songs of the 80s in the future. But this, for me, was a highlight. I really love Barry Manilow's very tender and passionate version of this song. Have I Told You Lately? I think Manilow made it his own, and it's a shame we really didn't get more exposure for it, because I think people would have really liked this version.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Those are oh, hang on. There's one more thing I want to talk about. We kept a secret from you earlier, but we want to talk about another version of the Sincerely and Teach Me Tonight medley. Barry, what's different, and who did he sing it with in 2006, the only time it was performed?
Yes, so in Japan, they had Have I Told You Lately as a bonus track as well as a substitution. They used Teach Me Tonight, Sincerely, the medley that he did with Phyllis McGuire, and they brought in a Japanese recording artist to sing the female vocal part. And that is really interesting to listen to. She's a fantastic vocalist. And let me look up her name. I
got it right here. It's
okay.
Hiromi Iwasaki. Hiromi. Hiromi actually came to the Hilton August 5th, 2006, when they performed it one time only, and she was the duet partner. And we just saw that on Manilow TV. Another great reason to subscribe to that service. So now that we've talked about that, I do believe it is time to do my personal favorite segment of this show, the MVP section. Barry, what are we about to do to these people?
Okay, so every time we discuss an album, Logan and I pick an MVP, a most valuable player. We nominate somebody who we feel made contributions to this album that otherwise, without their contributions, this album would not be as great if it was not for them. So, Logan, do you have yours?
I do. It's right here. Let's do it.
Okay, so on the count of three, Logan and I are going to show this to each other for the first time. We've never talked about or seen what we're going to pick, so we're going to see it for the first time. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
My pick is Clive Davis.
Clive Davis. I said Walter A. Okay, Logan, why did you pick Clive Davis?
Without Clive Davis, this album would not have happened. It's a very famous story that one night after a show, Clive Davis came backstage to Barry Manilow and gave him a list of 1950s songs, saying, I think you should make an album called The Greatest Songs of the 50s, where you pay tribute to the 1950s. So without Clive Davis, and Clive Davis was a producer on this record as well, without Clive Davis and without Arista and bringing Manilow back and just this perfect storm of opportunities, without Clive Davis, this album would never have happened. Barry, Walter A., I think I know your reasoning, but why did you pick Walter?
So I picked Walter A. because Unchained Melody was my favorite song on this entire record. I love that Barry Manilow had an opportunity to record a song that had a real contemporary edge, but yet it's something that we were all familiar with, and it gave him the opportunity to express what is so great about Barry Manilow, the interpreter. And I think that's what Clive Davis has always championed. Barry Manilow, the interpreter. I knew that Clive Davis felt so highly of Barry Manilow's skills as an interpreter that for much of the 90s, a lot of the records were cover records, all songs of Barry Manilow singing songs that the audience was familiar with. So Walter A. did a fantastic job of not only bringing a contemporary feel to this song, but also let Manilow be Manilow. And I think that their collaboration really was a match made in heaven.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is a one-part episode, which is a little rare on the Manilow Method channel. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, we recommend you do so. Turn that notification bell on. You can find all the videos we post. We're posting stuff multiple times throughout every week that we are in season. Barry, when do we post for our lovely audience?
Yes, so we try to post new content on Mondays and Fridays, so you can always expect something new from us around Mondays or Fridays, or depending upon what's going on. We usually try to do Mondays and Fridays. So what's going to happen after this episode is released as the grand finale of our celebration of the greatest songs of the 50s, Logan and I are going to collaborate on a song together. So stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. You can find us on social media at The Manilow Method, Facebook and Instagram at The Manilow Method, The Manilow Method on YouTube. If you're listening to us on streaming platforms, come over to YouTube, see what we look like, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. Just tell us what your thoughts are on this show, because this is very much a DIY production, and we greatly appreciate every single one of you that has stuck with us through our first season and now into our second season. You can email us at themanilowmethod@gmail.com with all your stories, your theories, your ideas, your tinfoil hat moments. You can send us whatever you would like to that inbox, and we will happily read whatever you send us. So thank you all so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on the greatest songs of the 50s record from 2006, and we hope you will join us in the coming weeks when we talk about more fantastic Barry Manilow albums. We'll see you next time, where we couldn't give enough, but now we can. We are the Manilow Method. We'll see you soon, everybody.